First of all, thank you so much for braving the weather and coming to Dix Park and joining us for In Plain Sight at the Gregory Poole Jr. All Faiths Chapel. It is so great to see people in person, even though we're behind our masks. Hopefully we can look into each other's eyes and say hello. And we're so appreciative for everyone joining us this evening. My name is Kate Pierce, and I am the planning supervisor for Dorothea Dix Park for the City of Raleigh, and it is my honor and pleasure to welcome y'all here tonight. In Plain Sight is a great program that we have in store for you, and it was developed in partnership with the Triangle Native American Society and the Legacy Committee of the Dorothea Dix Park Conservancy. This has been a program in the works for some time, and we are so excited to bring this to you tonight and continue the celebration on Saturday at the first intertribal powwow that will be held at the park. One of the other things that is really important to the city and to the park is that we have joined the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. And it's an organization that really looks at places with a complicated past, helps them metabolize that history, and not just honor it and think about it, but how do we move from memory to action, from the past to the present? And so this program is an example of doing just that. I am very excited to introduce my friend and colleague, Anne Franklin. Anne is the chair of the Dix Park Legacy Committee, and we'll kick off our program. So thank y'all for being here, and make yourselves at home.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you to all who've helped make this possible. Susan Garrity, Danny Bell of our Sites of Conscience, part of the Legacy Committee, have done a lot of work to pull everybody together, and this is a wonderful looking crowd, and we'll be joined by a few other people as they dance between the raindrops. I serve on the Conservancy, Dix Park Conservancy Board, and that is the group that raises funds and supports the development of Dix Park, along with all of you and our funders and our people in the community who believe that Dix Park can be a place for rest and respite and healing and reconciliation and just paying attention to trees and water and to one another. So this is launching the beginning. We're going to have a whole lot more activities that I think you'll find interesting coming up, and we think that there's a room for storytelling that's important to all of our cultures. We want to welcome people who have never even been at Dix Park. They may be new to Raleigh, but we think Dix Park and our whole park system is a resource for engaging people. And we want to thank the mayor and our members of city council. They may be able to join us in a bit, but it takes a lot of partners working together. So tonight, we hope to build an understanding of North Carolina's Native American heritage. And we want to raise awareness of their presence and critical contribution to our state at every level. This is called In Plain Sight, because we want to notice who is in our community and who is around us. And so tonight the first thing we're going to do is a little exercise, because we think that listening well is fundamental to how healthy we can be. So we're just going to do a little exercise, and it won't take long, but I think it'll be painless. But I hope it'll be a sample of how we can expand our awareness of who's in the room. So we're going to ask you to do this in pairs. You may know the person, you may not. Just turn to somebody. And each person will have 2 minutes uninterrupted to be listened to. And the questions that I want you to answer are, who are the people that you come from? And how are things for them? This is not a problem-solving circumstance. This is not a jump in and say, oh, I knew that person from over there. This is just listening. So we're going to begin that, and I'm going to start my watch, and I don't wear a watch anymore. Start my phone, and I'll let you know when the first 2 minutes is up. So the questions are, who are the people that you come from, and how are things for them? So please begin. Okay, that is your 2-minute signal. So if you have been doing all the talking, then it's time to turn around and listen to the other person. Okay, we're going to put a stop there, if I could get your attention again. I'm going to ask... If you can give anybody 2 minutes of uninterrupted listening in the course of a day, it'll be powerful. Thank you very much for giving this a try, and we'll depend on you and others in the community to help us be as listening as we can. We want to listen to the trees and the water and the land. And we want to listen to the people who have labored here and lived here. And we want to listen to the hearts of people who find refreshment and relaxation and hope here at Dix Park. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Sandon Jacobs, and he is a member of the Waccamaw-Siouan tribe, and he'll be leading us in another activity.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. It's an honor and a privilege to be asked this afternoon, or this evening rather, to, she's a little shorter than me, I'm sorry, to be asked to render a couple of songs here tonight at Dix Park, and being a resident of Raleigh that comes from one of our native communities that's, you know, a couple of hours away. I've been here, Dr. Emanuel and I were talking about, I've been here 22 years, and it's good to see the City of Raleigh reaching out to our native communities, and with programs like this and the powwow going on this weekend. And so, again, it's just an honor to be able to come here tonight and to sing at this celebration, this program this evening. If you're able to, I'd ask if you could stand, as we're going to call on the Executive Director of the North Carolina Commission on Indian Affairs, Greg Richardson, from the Hallowasaponi Nation. He's going to be bringing in an eagle staff that we're going to post here this evening. This eagle staff is brought to us from the Coharie tribe down in Sampson County, which happens to be the tribe of my grandparents, my paternal grandmother, and my mom's family as well. So it's an honor also to be able to sing that song to acknowledge that staff this afternoon. So Greg, I'm going to render a song as he brings the staff forward.
Hey,
Thank you for standing, and we're going to turn things over to Greg Richardson.
Thank you, Sandra. Let's give him a round of applause for that wonderful song. This wonderful program that's coming together in this historic city on this historic site in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's the first in sight, in plain sight, but American Indians have not been in sight for many generations in many ways. But now we see a change coming, and a change that's very positive. On this very campus this weekend is going to be a powwow celebration. It's going to bring to this historic site memories from years past. We know that from years past that there are connections with this property. In fact, we know that there are American Indians who are buried here on this property and has been here for many years. So in plain sight is where we are. So I want to thank the committee. I want to thank all of you for what you've done to bring this together. I am honored, so honored to be here tonight to be part of this kickoff for a grand celebration and a historic moment in time for this city. There's been a lot of work put into this. Time won't allow me tonight to give recognition to all that I know. All the people that I know have been part of this grand event. You're going to hear from some of them tonight, though. You're going to hear some very specific things about our population that perhaps many of you may not know. Now, you know, we've been dealing with a pandemic for quite a time in our nation and our state right now. And it has been very impactful on the American Indian population. You perhaps have heard some of the news in terms of how impactful it has been. But I can tell you it's been impactful from a very, very sad scenario in that we've lost so many of our elders in the last year. These are people who carry the message of our people, carry the history of our people forward, the stories that are told, passed on to younger generations. We've lost a lot of that. The North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs, who I represent tonight, is the key agency within state government that pay attention to American Indian advocacy. So we're so pleased to be a part of this program tonight. I bring you greetings on behalf of our Secretary Pam Cashwell. Brewington Cashwell. The Brewington name, there is the American Indian connection. Pam Cashwell's Coharie and Lumbee. She's the first American Indian to serve as Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Administration and the first female American Indian to serve in the Governor's Cabinet. Tonight we have Mr. Quinn Godwin back here. Quinn, if you would stand, who is in the Governor's office, who's on the Governor's staff, and his father is Chairman Godwin of the mighty Lumbee tribe. Thank you for being here. I also wanted to acknowledge a couple of other things here. We know that this is Indian Heritage Month, and I want to put in a plug for that. So Allison Volley is here with the North Carolina Museum of History, and I want to also ask her to stand. And I'm going to ask Emily Grant if she will stand, because she went and retired on us, and now she's turned the rim over to Allison Volley. Allison, where are you? There she is over there. So put the 20th on your calendar. It's going to be a virtual celebration this year because of COVID still. But I can tell you, you can still enjoy a lot of history and a lot of information that's going to be streamed out to the public. Last year, it was also virtual, but we know that it was the largest, perhaps, celebration ever. It's my understanding that it was live streamed in at least several countries in the world. So that's so important. That tells me that the message of American Indians now is still getting out there, and that we're also helping people understand that we're still here in plain sight. So thank you for this opportunity. And at this point, I'm going to introduce one of the speakers tonight, Mr. Curry Bird, who is the president of the Triangle Native American Society here in Raleigh, North Carolina. The Triangle Native Society is one of 4 urban associations that look out for the best interest of American Indians who live in urban areas of this state. Coharie, I'm so pleased that Triangle Native is part of this event in plain sight here at Dix Park, part of this work. Coharie Bird, President of Triangle Native American Society.
Good evening. My name is Coharie Bird. I'm Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate. My dad was from the Lake Traverse Reservation in South Dakota. My mom was Lumbee Indian from Robeson County, which is where I was born and raised. But I always knew my connection to both tribal groups and how important that was. Family was extremely important to our family, and so it was very important to know those ancestors and where we came from. I am president of Triangle Native American Society. We are an urban Indian organization recognized by the Commission of Indian Affairs in 2000. We were actually established in 1984. We came together with a group of individuals who wanted to maintain their sense of family, their sense of community. This was before social media, before we had cell phones. Computers were probably just getting kind of part of the picture. But we came together to promote and protect the American Indian identity here in the Triangle area. Today there are over 11,000 American Indians living in the 5 counties that we serve: Johnston, Wake, Durham, Orange, and Chatham counties. Wake County has a little over 5,700 American Indians living in Wake County. So we're very proud of that, and we're very excited to be a part of this particular program tonight, and certainly with the powwow that's going on Saturday. We're work a lot with the school system. We have Gwen Locklear, who's the coordinator for our Title VI Indian Education Program. We have that support from the Wake County Public School System to provide those resources for our Native students who are in the school system. So we're very proud of her work. One of the things that I've been asked to do is actually introduce Janet Cowell, who is the executive director of the Dix Park Conservancy, and she's going to give a land acknowledgement statement. And land acknowledgement statements are something that's, I won't say is relatively new, but certainly is new to most of us in regards to how they're given. I think they need to be given in an honorable and respectful way, that there's something that acknowledges not only the original inhabitants of the land, but acknowledging that we are still here, and that they're given as a sense of visibility for our community as well as our place here in contemporary society. I think it's important to acknowledge that the land, although we may not know who exactly was walking upon this land that's now Dix Park, that we know there were native inhabitants who were living in the area, hunting in the area, traveling through the area from the north, the south, the east, and the west, and were gathered here for family reasons, for resources, for healing purposes, even before it became Dorothea Dix Hospital. That natives were here before, and we continue to be here today, and we're really glad to have this celebration that's going to occur here on this property. I'm going to invite Janet Cowell to come up and give us that land acknowledgement that they've developed for this particular property, but also that you'll probably hear land acknowledgements in other forms in other places because they are very popular, but just to make sure that they're always given in a sense of respect to the native inhabitants who were on this particular property. So thank you.
Thank you, Coharie. Honored to be with you tonight and to be able to read this land acknowledgement. So Dix Park recognizes that North Carolina is the ancestral home of many indigenous tribes, including the Coharie, the Cherokee, the Halawasaponi, the Lumbee, the Meherrin, the Occaneechi, the Saponi, and the Waccamaw Siouan people. For 14,000 years, Native Americans used the land for family life, nourishment, justice, ceremony, and healing. For the past 500 years, Native American communities across North Carolina have continued to live by their traditional values in the face of counterforces. Dix Park recognizes and celebrates the lives and heritage of American Indians residing in the state's 100 counties and urban areas. we are inspired to learn from the example of North Carolina's Native people to be caregivers, partners, and successful stewards of the land. I'm now going to introduce Lydia Downs. She is a Maritime Studies Master student at East Carolina University, and her presentation is Dugout Canoes, an intersection of water, land, and culture. And this addresses the rediscovery, recovery, and preservation of the 650-year-old Kohari Canoe, which unfortunately is not in the chapel. I know I asked that as well. But she'll have a lot more information about this canoe, as well as the construction and use of similar canoes in North Carolina and elsewhere on the East Coast. So Lydia, thank you for being with us this evening.
All right. Hi, I'm Lydia, and I'm going to talk about my research with the Kohari Canoe, and in my presentation, Dugout Canoes, the intersection of water, land, and culture. So the Kohari Canoe was rediscovered in May of 2018 by a man named Jonathan Autry. He was fishing along the shores of the South River outside of Fayetteville. And so he saw this log protruding out of the water, and he waded into the shallows, and upon closer inspection, he noticed that it was burned and hollowed out along its length, and he immediately identified it as a dugout canoe. So he tried to pull it out of the water, but the other end was embedded in the riverbed. So he decided that he would leave, get some help to pull it out, and come back. So word of this canoe spread like wildfire, and it reached the Office of State Archaeology here in North Carolina, and they knew that they needed to get the canoe so that it could be properly treated and maintained. So no one at the State Archaeology Office was available to go and retrieve the canoe, so they called some friends that they had at the Transportation Museum in Fayetteville and sent them to go get the canoe. And they knew that they had to act fast because Autry and his friend were planning to go and retrieve the canoe that day. So when the 3 employees from the Transportation Museum got to the location where the canoe was said to be at, Autry and his friend, who was carrying a pistol, were already there. So the members of the Transportation Museum had to stand at the water's edge and watch as Autry and his friend pulled the canoe out of the water. And then a roadside custody battle for the canoe kind of took place. The sheriff's department was called, and a deputy came, and so Autry wanted to take the canoe home and dry it out and use it as a fishing vessel, but the state wanted to properly preserve it, and it was eventually decided that since it was found in state waters, it was property of the state, and it went with the Transportation Museum members that day. And this is a picture of it taken by Autry as they were pulling it out of the water. So this is an image of the canoe at the Transportation Museum. So you'll notice that it's wrapped in towels. This is to make sure that it stays moist. Organic materials such as wood that have been waterlogged for long periods of time have to be dried out very slowly, otherwise they could be damaged irreparably. So it stayed at the Transportation Museum for 4 days in these towels before it could be moved to the Fort Fisher Preservation Laboratory. And so there they were able to treat it with a bulking solution called SP11, which would slowly replace the water molecules inside the cells so that the cells couldn't collapse and damage the canoe. So it was in this bulking solution until September of 2018, and then that treatment was finished. In November of 2018, it had to be moved from the Fort Fisher Preservation Lab because Hurricane Florence was coming in and it was beelining for the laboratory. So they moved it to the QAR lab in Greenville, which is where the Queen Anne's Revenge artifacts, which was Blackbeard's flagship, all of that material is also housed at QAR lab. So this canoe, they discovered that with radiocarbon dating, it is give or take 650 years old. It is 12 feet and 9 inches long. The width is 20 inches and the depth of the inside is 9 inches, and they're pretty sure that it is made of longleaf pine wood, but they had probably written in the report, so they don't know exactly. So then in 2019, it was repatriated to the Coharie tribe. So I wanted to give some background on how these canoes would have been used 650 years ago when the Kohari Canoe was created. So this is an engraving done by Theodore de Bray. It is a colonial kind of image of what was going on, so it's not a perfect depiction. But I really like this image because it shows all the stages of the canoe construction. So in the top right-hand corner, you can see the tree that would have been selected to build a canoe, and there's a fire around the base. And this is a process called girdling. So they would have burned through the base of the tree because it would have been much easier than trying to cut through it with an axe. In order to control the fire, they would have put clay around the part of the tree that they didn't want burned, and that would keep the fire low. In the kind of other upper corner, you can see that they've removed the branches from the part of the tree that they want to use, and then they're burning the upper part so that the canoe will be that desired length. They can basically burn through and remove the top of the tree. In the foreground, they've put it up on a sort of platform so that it's at a more workable height. You don't have to bend over. They would remove the bark and then use a burning and scraping technique to get the desired dimensions for the rest of the canoe. And again, they would have used clay to control what was burned and what wasn't burned. So there were a lot of uses for dugout canoes 650 years ago. They would have used it for transportation and trade and economy and building relationships with neighboring communities and tribes. So in this image, you can see one of their fishing techniques, because of course subsistence was a big deal also. So you can see that there's a fire burning in the center of the canoe, which a lot of you might think that's strange. Why would you put a fire in a boat that is out in the middle of a lake or in the ocean? So this technique would have been done primarily at night, and they would have had a basin made of clay or soapstone, and one person in the canoe, it would have been their job to kind of maintain that fire and make sure it didn't get out of control. And the other members of the fishing party would be ready with spears. So the light of the fire would attract fish to the canoe, and it would also illuminate the water so that they could easily be speared and put into the boat. Another technique that's not depicted in this image would be to string a rope across the river or a waterway, and then they would periodically have lines with hooks, much like we use today, put along that rope, and then they could just pull themselves across in the canoe and check and rebait the hooks. And it was a very easy, hands-off way of fishing. And another cool thing about fishing is that it was something that both genders would equally partake in. So a lot of tasks in Native life 650 years ago was fairly genderized. So the hunting was mostly done by men, gardening by women, but fishing was something that both men and women equally did. So for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to see the Kohari Canoe, and I know a lot of you wanted it to be here tonight, but it weighs several hundred pounds, so not really possible. But I created this photogrammetry model and animation, which, can we play it? We'll play it, and then you can, yeah. So it's I went to the Coharie Tribal Center, which is where the canoe is housed. I took 177 photos of this canoe, and then I spent a week putting it all together in this program and creating this model that I can now share with you today. So yeah, up next, well, here to speak about the repatriation of the canoe to the Coharie tribe is Mr. Greg Jacobs. Greg is a member of the Coharie tribe and tribal administrator for the Coharie Intertribal Council and board member for the United Tribes of North Carolina. So, thank you.
First of all, I'd like to say that I'm Greg Jacobs, the tribal administrator of the Coharie tribe, and I'm very honored to be so. Now, I would say that the Coharie tribe is the best tribe in North Carolina, but Greg Richardson is sitting right there, and all of the Lumbees are sitting in here in the Waccamaw. So I'll say it is one of the best tribes in North Carolina. So you all can come to see us, and I'll let you decide for yourself what you think about that. But I do appreciate the committee having me here, and the land acknowledgement statement. It was very heart-touching. I've been around for a lot of years, 68 to be exact, and I haven't heard those kind of things. And for us to be acknowledged as the indigenous people of this land, it does something to your heart. I had a father, his name was Amy Jacobs. He passed at 102 years old. I wish he could have heard that statement that you said today. It would have made him smile. It was emotional with feelings. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is that I come from the Coharie tribe. Basically, we reside in Sampson and Harnett counties of North Carolina, about 70 miles down the road. There's about 3,500 members enrolled in the tribe. So we're a very small tribe considering our population, but what we're lacking in size, we make up for in pride. So what I'm going to talk to you tonight is basically one of the programs that is operated by the tribe in our pursuit of upgrading the health, education, and welfare of all of our tribal members, and that's basically around soil and water conservation. What I'm specifically going to be talking about is the Great Coharie Initiative is one of the projects that the tribe carries out. So if I could, would you play the video?
Yes, sir.
And I hope you can feel our people as you look at the video and what we're all about and what we're trying to do. A different story is being told today about Native American people. It's a story of integrity and honor and pride. The great Coharie River, that's who we are, we're river people. And I have seen that river breathe life in all of those that go down it today. The story that I'm telling is a story of beauty and then a story of disappointment in the way that the river has become. There was something special about the water. There was life in the water. We've got a saying around here that the river is always taking care of us, and now it's calling out for help, and we got to take care of it. That canopy that I used to walk under is gone. Those paths that I used to walk down is gone. There's a spirit in that river, the spirit of my ancestors, and it has been awakened in this tribe. So we're revisiting the past to take us into a strong future. That river is our culture. That's who we are. We're river people. And to bring that back into the equation is helping the circle to be completed. I thought that was a good video, didn't you? Yeah. Yeah, I would like to thank the American Indian Center and UNC Chapel Hill for helping us put that video together. That was actually the work of a capstone course at UNC Chapel Hill. The capstone course students, I guess, put it together under the direction of a professor, Dr. David Salveson, and we sure do appreciate them doing that for us. So I've got a few slides. I don't speak as well as Lydia, So I need some pictures to motivate me, and I just pull from my heart what I feel when I see the picture. So with that, I'll ask you for the first slide. This slide takes me back to my childhood. It takes me back to my childhood. I guess I need to stay close to this microphone. I came up through segregation, and we weren't welcomed at public facilities back then. So this river was our safe haven. It was our happy place. It was our stronghold. Today in the Coharie tribe, if you'll see the first picture up here, what comes to mind is that what I'm working for today is to leave the soil and the water in better shape for the future generations than it was, leave it in better shape than we found it. That happens to be my great nephew that's in my arms that took a ride with me that day down the Coharie River. I think he was 3-year-old at that time, but you know, I learned him to say water is life, so I had to hear that ride over and over about 50 times, probably took that ride, that water is life. The picture over here on your left, and that's 3 of my great nephews. They're my inspiration for doing what I'm doing, the cleaning out the great Coharie River. This river initiative came from the vision of one of our elders that looked at me back in 2010, 2011, when I became the tribal administrator for the Coharie tribe the second time. And she said, "What about our river?" And I thought, what about our river? Brought back to mind that I hadn't paid the river much attention since I was a little boy. Those 3 little boys were me a long time ago, a long time ago. So I am passing on what my dad passed to me, the medicine of the Coharie River, the spirit of the river, the calmness of the river. This is my granddaughter, Dallas Jacobs. I have passed that on to her, and she has a passion for that same river. Next slide, please. Philip Bell. Wouldn't be, many of you know Philip Bell right here. I couldn't stand up here before you and talk about the Coharie River without bringing his spirit with me. I called him the Coharie River legend. He's an humble man. He don't like me to speak much about him, but I came to him after speaking with the elders about what we were going to do about the river. And I told him, I said, "Philip, I can't hardly sleep at night." And I told her about the conversation I'd had with the elders about the river. And he said, "Man, have you seen the river lately?" And I said, "No, what are you talking about?" He said, "It's become a swamp. Climate change and storms, obstructions in the river." He said, "It doesn't flow freely anymore. It's become a swamp because the water has flooded out of the banks. It can't empty out." And, you know, he became cheerful in his eyes, and he said, "I got 2 grandsons," and I'll try to remember the words that he said. He said, "I would like for them to have the same quality of life that you and me had when we were children." And he brought me back to the first frame when I learned how to swim at that exact spot where my great nephews are playing at that one time. And he says, "You can't hardly fish and you can't get to the fishing holes anymore. You can't walk down those paths and even get to the river." He said, "It's water for half a mile outside of the banks where the water don't flow." And I looked at him in some kind of thoughts and said, "Well, we'll just have to clean it out then." I didn't believe what I was saying, but he was about to cry on me, and you know, and so those words came out of my mouth. And he said, "Well, how are we going to do that?" I said, "Well, just get some volunteers from the community, and we'll go in there and we'll try to clean this out a path to the Downer Hole," which was a famous fishing place. And I thought that was about all that we could do. He said, "When we're going to start?" "Saturday morning." I'm a talker. Philip's a doer. I mean, if you say you're going to do it, Philip is on it. He's been on the Great Coharie River ever since. Next slide, please. What we did was some young men in our community. Philip and I were already elders. I mean, I'm talking about talking to the elders. I am an elder. And they said, "Sure, we'll volunteer. We'll try to help clean the river out." On a Saturday morning early, This is the picture of some of the original fellows. That first morning, we borrowed us some boats, we borrowed us some chainsaws and some hand jacks, and we went down into that river to take on the impossible task of cleaning it out. And I remember telling Philip this. He said, we'll never get those big trees out of that river. And I said, Philip's just like our ancestors in the past. We're very spiritual people. If we'll stick our head down and do what we can, then the Creator will send the resources that we need to do the rest. Next slide. The Creator sent what we needed to do the rest. We're no longer using hand jacks. We've got contractors, subcontractors down there that for we were cleaning out 50 yards in a day. They can clean out a mile or 2 miles or 3 miles, where I thought that we could only maybe clean out a mile total with the way we were doing it. I'm happy to say that today the Coharie tribe has been part of cleaning out over 100 miles of waterway in Sampson County, and that started back to Boy, that chokes me up. I was wrong, but with a little faith, like my ancestors, we have come a very long way. And also, a couple of years ago, we received the Water Conservationist of the Year from the Wildlife Federation through the governor's office, and I thought that was a great accomplishment, the first Indian tribe in North Carolina to get that. And my last slide, and I'll stop rambling up here. Okay, this first slide makes me smile. Do you see that young man over there, that good-looking young man over there in the red jacket? He's here with us tonight, and he's my friend. So I want to talk about what starting that project under such minimal thoughts about what we could do. I guess maybe he heard that we were working with water down in Sampson County, and I got to meet Dr. Ryan Emmanuel, and since then he's been a regular coming down to Sampson County, offering his education and his talents as a scientist, helping us to put water monitoring systems and analyze the water to see if it's safe and what is the effect of climate change on the water, and we appreciate what you've done, Dr. Emanuel. This river has helped us to form associations. It's given us seats at the table. Right here standing with the canoe is staff members from the Department of Cultural Resources, the Archaeology Division. That is when they delivered the canoe to the Coharie Tribal Center, which is its final resting place. It is at peace there now. You know, they separated, they celebrated with us, they got emotional with us. I saw tears come down their face as we celebrated having the canoe back. But you know, it wasn't long ago that I didn't know anybody in cultural resources to call. But now one of the main things that this picture brings out is the young man in the middle. And what's his name, Greg? In the middle there, he comes to the Commission of Indian all the time. He heads up archaeology for the Department of John Mintz. He looked at me in this dispute over custody of the canoe. We wanted it to come, since it was taken out on Sampson County property, we wanted it to come to the Coharie tribe, and the founder wanted it to come to the Coharie tribe, but there was a dispute there. Other museums around the state would have loved to have had it, but we won, thankfully so. But he said to me, in my pursuit of getting the canoe back home with its people, he says, I'll work very hard to see that that happens. And I said, well, thank you, John. And John said to me, it's the only right thing to do. We were in plain sight. We were the indigenous people of the area where it was found. So that theme, in plain sight, it relates there to me tonight. But we appreciate the relationship that we have with the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources and Mr. John Mintz today. And I'd like to give him a hand. This old man, he looks like me. 102 years old when he stepped into eternity, and every time I come to a function like this, I like to bring his spirit with me, and I like to think that my ancestors are smiling on the work that we're doing with the soil and water conservation. I think that he understood the medicine of that river and the spirit of our ancestors that was in that river, and that river had something to tell a long time ago, because when I was a little boy, he took me to that river every chance he got, fishing, swimming, and he talked about the old stories of the old ancestors, and I'm so glad that he did that, and I'm hoping he's looking down on this event today, and thank you, committee, for making this event happen. The two pictures on the bottom left and the middle there, there's some of my Lumbee brothers and sisters. I think Charlene Hunt and Chad Pierce, that, you know, people come from all over to see the canoes today, and I get to see how they respond to the canoe. And they come with their gifts, and they come with their prayers, and they're honoring some kind of spirit that they feel that canoe possesses. That canoe has a story to tell to all of us, and I'm waiting on it to tell me more and more every day. And with people like Lydia Downs, I'm sure that's going to be an interesting path that we're going to follow. I forgot one thing. The young men that helped us at the initial kickoff of the Great Coharie River Initiative, one of them's name was Mr. Magic Gomez. And he was a young boy back then. Well, he's still sort of a young man, but he's with us tonight. He called me up and said, Mr. Gregg, I want to go with you. He is now a board member of the Kohari people down in Alabama for our tribe. And would you stand up, Mr. Magic? Yeah. With the work that Magic and all of those boys done that day, you can ask the little small children running around the Coharie Tribal Center right now, whose river is that? They say, it's our river, Mr. Gregg, or Magic. And I'm proud of you boys for, we didn't pay you anything, and you got plenty muddy and you worked hard, but we appreciate you helping us get to me standing on this stage talking about this program tonight. The drum here motivates me to say that the time has come that we as Native American people can express ourselves freely. We drum and we dance and we sing in a traditional way. I came up through segregation when that wasn't too popular. You would have been ridiculed. But not today. Things are changing. Things are changing. And I think the true story is being told. True story is being told here tonight, and I appreciate everybody involved. And thank you very much for letting me speak. And with that, I'd like to introduce my friend that I spoke about him a few moments ago. It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Ryan Emmanuel. He is my friend and currently leads the Eco Hydrology and Watershed Science Lab at North Carolina State University. He is a university faculty scholar and a professor in the Department of Forestry and Environmental Resources and a faculty fellow at the Center for Geospatial Analytics. In January, he will move to Duke University as Associate Professor of Hydrology at the Nicholas School of Environment. He is a proud member of the Lumbee tribe, and he does have some Coharie blood too, so anyway, I welcome you.
Ooh, y'all. That was powerful. Thank you, Greg and Lydia. I'm going to start a timer for myself. American Indians spend a lot of time and effort simply reminding people that we exist. You've heard some of that tonight, but you've seen and heard we don't just exist, but we thrive. And those of us that continue to live in our ancestral homelands in present-day North Carolina have worked hard to preserve and rekindle our deep connections to the lands and waters of our ancestors. And we owe a debt of gratitude to Greg and all of our elders who paved the way for us and lived through discrimination and segregation so that we could express ourselves freely today. I want to take a little bit of time this evening to celebrate the rich cultures and histories of the tribes in present-day North Carolina. And I want to do it by emphasizing in particular our strong connections to land and water. One selfish reason for doing this is that I'm trained as an environmental scientist who studies water. So when I think about Native North Carolinians, I see our tribal nations through the lens of the landscapes and waterways that we call home. As Mr. Gregg said, I'm Lumbee, and my indigenous ancestors came from various parts of the Piedmont and the coastal plain of present-day North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. And I want to take a moment to just ponder the physical landscapes that these ancestors called home. This is a map that centers the eastern half of North Carolina. The gray color shows land, the blue is water, and the green is wetlands, swamps, marshes, precosins, and other landscapes that are flooded or wet for some or part of the year. The eastern half of North Carolina is split into two major regions, the coastal plain and the Piedmont. Here in Raleigh, we sit in the Piedmont, which you can think of as a wide rolling plateau that sits at the foot of the Appalachian Mountains. And east of the Piedmont is the coastal plain. That starts east and southeast of where we are in Raleigh and extends all the way to the brackish estuaries and to the open Atlantic Ocean out to the east. And you know, we see something interesting as we move from the Piedmont down into the coastal plain. Specifically, wetlands are more prominent in the coastal plain than they are in the Piedmont. There's almost a visible line on that map that shows where this transition happens. That line, where it goes from mostly gray to mostly green, is the fall line. That is a gentle slope at the edge of the Piedmont, and it marks the highest level that the ancient ocean reached about 3 million years ago. Of course, there were no people around then, but we've all kinds of beautiful fossil evidence to show that just east and southeast of Raleigh was beachfront property. That also means that everything east of the fall line was once underwater. The ancient seafloor was pretty flat, and that's why the coastal plain today is mostly flat. Not only is it mostly flat, but it's also full of beautiful wetlands. Here's an example of one, a floodplain forest along the Lumbee River in Robeson County, where my family is from. You can see that beautiful black water. You also saw it in the video of the Great Coharie River. That's a hallmark of streams that don't flow out of the Piedmont or the mountains, but only in the coastal plain. And you can see those majestic bald cypress trees with their bulky trunks and knobby knees sticking up out of the rich wetland soil right there on the riverbank. You know, we've also got these massive open bodies of fresh water. This is Phelps Lake out near the coast. It's a giant, shallow, egg-shaped bowl of water, and it's teeming with fish. And every winter it is thick with migratory birds. We don't know exactly when people first came into this part of the world, but it was at least several thousand years ago. And we might imagine that the first people crossed the fall line from the Piedmont onto the coastal plain, or maybe they traveled up or down the fall line from places from the north or from the south. But in any case, when they arrived in what's now the coastal plain of eastern North Carolina, they would have seen this magnificent watery landscape open up before their eyes. The lakes, the swamps, the blackwater streams, they're very different landscapes than what you see west of the fall line. For example, the PD River, which cuts through the Piedmont, it's a wide and shallow river, but it's also rocky. The water's noisy as it tumbles over ledges and through jumbles of rock. In this photo, you can actually see ancient weirs that were constructed by indigenous people. They piled rocks up from the riverbed into V shapes or W shapes. Can you see them in that image? Those are hundreds or thousands of years old. As the fish swam downriver, they funneled into those narrow constrictions where people were waiting with woven baskets or spears to harvest them. And interestingly, there's little or no exposed bedrock in the coastal plain. So the first peoples there had to adapt their fishing practices east of the fall line. And I noticed in one of Lydia's images from the 1500s, you could actually see what they did. People created weirs out of canes or sticks. It was a practice that was pretty innovative, but it didn't leave much evidence behind. So while we can see these rock weirs today, we don't see the cane or the stick weirs that people used in the coastal plain. So I want to turn now and say that present-day North Carolina, as you've heard this evening, is home to a number of tribal nations that descend from these historic indigenous peoples. This slide shows a much larger area. This is the entirety of North Carolina and adjacent states. The names in gray are just a few of the historic indigenous groups that occupied this region, and you can see Raleigh there in the red circle. The names in black are the present-day tribal nations in North Carolina, but I also showed the Catawba Nation, since they're presently located just across the border in South Carolina, but of course they have deep ancestral ties to lands north of that arbitrary colonial boundary. And one thing to take away from this image is that every part of North Carolina was occupied by indigenous people at one time. And their descendants are still with us today, as you've heard this evening. Another way to think about this image is that the area around Dix Park in Raleigh was probably part of a complex borderland or a shared territory of numerous native groups, including, as you've heard, Tuscarora and various Siouan-speaking peoples like the Eno, the Occaneechi, Saxapahaw. One of the earliest written accounts from this area came from John Lawson. Now, I don't want to give him too much real estate here, but I just want to say that Lawson traveled down the Neuse River in early 1701. He wasn't an experienced traveler or explorer by any means, but he still managed to record some interesting details in his diary. And I read recently in his diary that somewhere in the general vicinity of present-day Wake County, 2 Tuscaroras hollered across the Neuse River at Lawson and his band and told Lawson's native guide that he ought not associate with wicked people like the English. The Tuscaroras were apparently on their way home from trading with the Occaneechis, and they were upset and expressing their concerns about settlers who had been encroaching on their lands further east down the Neuse River. In addition to written accounts of our ancestors by people like John Lawson, we've got these beautiful visual records from people like John White, and you saw some of those in Lydia's presentation. He was an artist who visited the coast of present-day North Carolina during the late 1500s, and he recorded the life of Algonquian-speaking peoples who lived along that ragged estuarine shoreline of what we now call the Albemarle and Pamlico Sounds. So here are 2 later renderings of White's original watercolors that showed daily life in the towns near present-day Bath. It's always been interesting to me that we usually call Bath the oldest town in North Carolina, whereas these towns here sat in the same general vicinity as Bath, but preceded it by at least hundreds of years. Native peoples were farmers, architects, hunters, potters, worshipers, warriors, and more. I imagine that some of the lines and curves on these drawings have been modified to suit European eyes and viewers. For example, that main boulevard through the town looks much like a European street. But you can still clearly see that these were sophisticated societies. They still live close to the natural world as well. And living close to the natural world also meant developing technologies that took advantage of natural cycles and processes that occurred in the Piedmont and the coastal plain. And one of those was fire. Long before people arrived here, lightning spark fires created a vast park-like ecosystem where tall, mature trees were interspersed with grasses and herbs. Those fires burn through the landscape at regular intervals every few years. They consumed leaves, litter, brush, saplings, but they left larger trees behind. And grass grew up in the wake of those fires. The most well-known ecosystem like this is shown on this image here, the longleaf pine savanna. It once covered millions of acres all across the southeast. The savanna is a rich ecosystem for plants and wildlife. Native peoples, when they arrived here, they actually enlarged and expanded the savanna by setting fires of their own. In essence, they used fire to create and maintain vast wildlife preserves. And they did this for thousands of years before Europeans arrived. Between the savanna, rivers, and streams, and the vast estuaries, Native peoples managed a rich and diverse region. And much of that diversity came through their active management of the landscape by fire. So just some things that took advantage of those landscapes. Turkey, deer, we even had bison as far east as parts of the coastal plain. We had migratory sturgeon that swam up our rivers and spawned in the rocky shallows. Shad, shellfish, it's such a rich place. It still is. You know, we also have evidence of some of the cultural traditions that went along with these materials. Wampum beads fashioned from the shellfish that you see here. And I like this John White watercolor of Wingina because if you look behind his apron, it appears that he might have a bison tail attached to his apron all the way out on the coast. I also want to point out that our cultures were heavily impacted by colonialism, obviously. The same artists and explorers who documented our ancestors' lives in the 1500s through the 1700s, they also brought war and disease and displacement to our families. Here's a commemoration of one of the most traumatic events, the war between the Carolina colonies and a confederation of Tuscarora people and their allies. In 1712 and 1713, two different colonial militias marched across the coastal plain. They plundered indigenous towns and farms, and they laid siege to strongholds like Fort New Hiroka. That war shattered many of our societies, especially in the eastern half of the state. The continued march of colonial expansion across North Carolina brought conflict and sickness to other communities as well. Many of our communities became isolated and marginalized, and many of them were criminalized as well. But something interesting happened during this period of isolation. We began to reach out to one another. Even in the midst of discrimination and segregation, isolated Native communities began to find one another. And so this happened oftentimes through education. Our tribes began to exchange teachers and in some cases students. The institution, the building up on the top left, is the first building of the institution that's now UNC Pembroke. They began training teachers that fanned out across tribal communities as far away as, I believe, the Halawa-Saponi and the Saponi tribes in the central part of the state. My own grandmother was one of those teachers. She was a graduate from the college, and she traveled up to the Halawa-Saponi Indian School to teach high school. A Saponi man even served as a principal of a prominent Lumbee school. So we had a lot of exchange. There was even more exchange via the East Carolina Indian School in Clinton that today is the headquarters for the Coharie tribe's government. Against all this happened amid harsh discrimination, and one reminder of that's the Battle of Hayes Pond on the right side of this slide. This is where Lumbee people and their allies routed the Ku Klux Klan in 1958. Hayes Pond and other acts of resistance were testimony to the strength and determination of North Carolina's Native peoples during the Jim Crow era. I know that there are similar stories from tribal communities throughout North Carolina. Even as American Indian self-determination began to take root and organize, and organizations like the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs sprang into being, we still face turmoil and tragedy. For example, in 1973, Old Main burned. That was a prominent building on the campus of our university in Pembroke. It was one of the most culturally important buildings on that campus and was a touchstone for Native peoples across North Carolina and the United States. Old Main actually had a positive ending to what began as tragedy. 3 years after this fire, the building got added to the National Registry of Historic Places, and then became the home of a museum and an academic program in American Indian Studies. And so what I really hope that you will take away from this talk and from the other things that you've heard this evening is that we're distinct peoples and distinct tribal nations, but we share histories of colonization, discrimination, and also resilience. Today, you've heard that there are 8 recognized tribes, there are 4 urban Indian organizations, there are even multiple unrecognized groups in the state, and more than 140,000 American Indians all told living in North Carolina. We are fully integrated into 21st century society. We participate in arts, in education, science, and government. We're fierce protectors of our ancestral territories, because if we aren't the frontline stewards and advocates for our land and water, who will be? Colonialism is still with us. It's a force of extraction and exploitation. And many Native people view pollution and degradation of the environment as just the latest chapter in this long history of efforts to separate us from our homelands. I would invite you all to continue to hear our stories and continue to celebrate our cultures with us. But I would also call you into the practice of keeping our homelands, the lands that we now share with all North Carolinians, a truly special place. So whether you're in the coastal plain, the Piedmont, or the mountains, remember that all of it continues to be Indigenous lands. So thank you all very much.
You know, with the creation of Dix Park, the rewilding and the restoration of the Rocky Branch and the bringing back nutrients to this land, it's just taking on a different meaning after hearing from y'all tonight. And I look forward to the continued partnership and all of the things that we're gonna do here in the future. I really want to say thank you to the Legacy Committee for all of the work, Susan and Ann and Danny for pulling this together. And also thank you to Curry and the Triangle Native American Society for all of the work that will continue as we move forward. The presenters have offered to hang around a little bit and answer any questions. I would also like to invite everyone to join us in the lobby for a couple of snacks and a little take-home gift. And stop and see the exhibits that are in the back from the Triangle Native American Society and the City of Raleigh exhibit on the history of North Carolina Native Americans. With that, I'd like to invite everyone to stand for the procession out. And again, thank you for being here, and please join us at the powwow on Saturday.
Thank you.